are just joining us on Facebook Live, I'm Lauren Van Hamert from RDU on Stage, and I'm sitting with Tony nominee, film, TV, stage star Alan Campbell. I really appreciate you being with me tonight. If you
Thanks
have
for
any
having me.
questions, you can type them into the comments section, and I'll ask them to Alan. It's a weird time, right? Last time we were sitting at your kitchen table doing this interview
Yeah,
for
yeah.
podcast.
About to do a play, a real play in a real theater with real people.
Oh, that was so 2019.
It wasn't it? Wasn't it? Oh my gosh, it was so pre-COVID.
And how was your experience in that play? Because I was chatting with you either prior to you going into rehearsal or you were just finishing. I don't think you had actually started rehearsal on.
I don't think I had either.
It
Yeah,
was witness. It was Agatha Christie.
Christie's witness for the prosecution. Yeah, in Judson. It was wonderful. It was a terrific experience. It was harder than I thought it would be. You know, when you put together the dialect and a, a a tremendous amount of dialogue and the legalese. All those three things thrown in together it's one of the most challenging learns I've ever done. You know, things I've had to learn. I think I've learned bigger plays and wordier plays, but it was very, very challenging. And to also, try to get the period and the way these guys operate and in a court in England um, at that time was, there was a lot to it and a very short rehearsal process. So
So was that your last play?
it was, yeah, that was right just before the holidays. And afterwards, I was, kind of in negotiations to do something in July. It would have started rehearsals weeks ago, but que sera, we'll see. Yeah.
Crazy, crazy. And we were chatting before we went on air. What have you, or before we went live, there was some sort of benefit or reading. What was it actually? Because there were some big people in the transport group.
Oh
That
well, it was
participated.
just we have a group of us that we talked about doing something. It wasn't actually a live. There's a group of us that did this piece called "Hello Again." Michael John Lacusa. It's kind of a bit esoteric. It was off Broadway at Lincoln Center years ago, and then we did the revival of it. But it was just some incredible people. Elizabeth Stanley, Max von Essen, Rachel Bay Jones, Alexandra Silber, Bob Stillman, a lot of really, really incredible theater artists. And every now and then you get lucky enough in this business that you work with a group of people, and we go through casts, and you keep in touch with one or two people, and things move on. And as the years go on, if you're lucky, you keep those people as friends, and you communicate with them. But this cast in particular, we've stayed pretty close, and we have these incredibly long text chains going almost constantly, and celebrate when somebody gets a job, or in the case of Rachel, won a Tony. And the eh, and so it's like a big support group, and every now and then we will include the people at the transport group, and we'll just talk about projects and things that we want to do. And Jack Cummings, that runs the transport group, is an amazing, amazing director and producer. But he's in a situation. They were all in New York. Several of them had COVID, and I think Alexander Silver was coming back from the West End. I think she was doing Indecent in the West End, and got on a plane when everybody was like rushing back right before they were talking about shutting things down. And of course, um, she brought it back to New York and got sick in New York. And she's a young, healthy woman and got through it okay, but uncomfortable, and gave it to her boyfriend. And, that was one of those New York stories. So we just tried to support each other through all that.
Elizabeth Stanley, when we spoke about her when I interviewed you for the podcast, she's had
Mhm.
an amazing year.
Mhm.
Had we had a Tony Awards, my guess is she would have been nominated one for Jagged Little Pill. Her work in it
Oh,
was
yeah,
extraordinary.
absolutely. And I think hopefully, I don't know what they're going to do with the Tonys, but I know she's gotten some plaudits from the some of the other award, been nominated. So we'll see, Dramatist Guild and some other things. So hopefully that'll happen in Jagged Little Pill, because that was one of the shows. I think, I don't know how long it had been open, but not very long, and it was doing incredibly well. I mean, it was like one of the most talked about shows in on Broadway at the time. So we'll see.
I did see it. I saw the very first preview in New
Oh
York. I
wow.
was there. I was actually leaving New York the next day, but did manage to get a single ticket to that preview. And I'm not a fan of jukebox musicals. I really don't like them very much, but it is not a typical jukebox musical in any
No.
sense of the word. Really interesting how they wove the songs into this really compelling story.
Yeah, I think it's um, the next stage of jukebox musicals. What they can be with a strong book and a really good, strong, layered concept. I think they can work pretty good. I mean, I was in the ultimate jukebox musical with Mamma Mia, and still probably the most successful. Really, when you think about it. But it was it didn't try to be anything but just an
Just
escapist
fun.
evening. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Mamma Mia is one of the few jukebox musicals I actually love because it
Did you
doesn't
really?
pretend to be anything. It's not. It's
It's up on
just
that wall somewhere back there.
it's just good campy fun. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
some musicals, I think just some jukebox musicals take themselves way too seriously, and that's
Yeah.
what I don't
Not
like.
not not the case with Mamma Mia.
No. No, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
You've been working in this industry for a long time, film, camera, stage. Do you ever remember a time when there's been a complete industry wide shutdown like this?
No, I I can remember when I was working in TV, there was a writer's strike, and that shut us down. I think it was for about a quarter to a third of the TV season. I think it was 19, maybe 88 or 89.
Hmm.
And that felt like everything just stopped, and the pickets went up and you couldn't drive into the studio. And yeah, I mean but that was so different than this, and especially in terms of the theater and being able to get together. This has not only felt like, such a challenge for theater artists and everything else that requires shared experience, but also just people, those of us, just trying to live our lives. This is a much bigger thing than just actors not being able to act, obviously. So it's been a challenge on so many levels, you know.
You've worked on some web series. Do you think having experience working on a streaming series like that has perhaps um, better prepared you or better positioned you for a post COVID entertainment environment or post COVID auditions or
Yeah,
workshops?
I mean, I'm still getting used to auditioning by, sending tapes and stuff like that, because when I started, you were always in the room, and then, when you got close to a job, they'd fly you somewhere to meet the people and everything, and that doesn't happen quite as much anymore. In a way, it's great because you can live different places and you can still submit tapes and everything, and you can do it without a lot of just a camera phone, a tripod, and a decent light, and you can audition. It's much more difficult to do it on a theater audition, because then I can't imagine someone giving anyone a big theater job from a tape, because you know acting is different in person. It's different. There's a certain way in which you move, and move air around a room, essentially, that when you're on stage becomes so important. I know a lot of incredible stage actors that have found it very difficult to act on film, and vice versa sometimes, for that reason. But I think the web series for me were almost like uh, working in the television industry. They were just so reduced, the hours, the equipment. They almost felt like guerrilla TV when I did them. I did this one. Then we got help, and we'd filmed out in Queens, at an apartment, someone's 2-bedroom apartment, and all the equipment was, and it would get hot because you couldn't have the windows open, and we would work sometimes 8-9 hours to get all the takes in one episode or 1.5 episodes, and then we'd do that a few days in a row, and then everybody'd go their separate way. And some of us were working in the theater at that time. You had jobs in the evening, so you'd work all day. But that felt really kind of, you know, um, kind of bare bones in a way. But the product in the end was kind of amazing when we actually saw it and it was cut together. And that was the early days of like decent digital cameras, so that they could just shoot it all on a drive and edit it together. And they weren't really doing that in the wider, higher budget world at that time, which now they are. I shot a movie about a year ago, a thing called Uncle Frank, that was an Alan Ball film. He won an Academy Award for writing American Beauty, and and it was all shot on digital camera. I mean, it was a feature film that was literally, and it had some of that same easy, you didn't have all the huge lights and it didn't take forever. You'd have someone like hold a light bar, and indifferent saying, move it back or move it above. And then they'd shoot a small scene out on a fire escape. One of the scenes that I did was on a fire escape with just the cameraman, a couple guys holding lights, and the two actors. And that was it. And that would have been very difficult to do back in the day when I was, doing series television. You would have the big cameras and the dollies and all that kind of stuff. So in a way, it kind of has opened the industry up a little bit, I think.
Do you think that this kind of guerrilla production that you're talking about, this bare bones production, is that what we're going to be seeing in kind of this post COVID world when we're still trying to keep actors safe? And, are we looking at kind of stripped down productions as far as film and
I,
television?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's always going to be, I keep thinking, because I've been home a lot and I have a 16-year-old daughter, and we're streaming constantly and we're watching all this different content. And I'm thinking, well, I mean, you got to feed the beast. You got to create new content. And you can't do that with an iPhone, all of it. So I think production now has started to come back a little bit. Um, but what I'm so happy to see is there seems to be a lot of people at least attempting to innovate and say, okay, I have these skills, and whether it's writing skills or acting skills or production skills, how in this moment can I stay creative, create content that is going to be interesting? And you've seen people, these breakout thing, and people start making TikToks and suddenly they're making these amazing. I watched this guy that had like 2 or 3 million hits because he made a maze for squirrels in his backyard because they were robbing all his bird food. So he decided to make this unbelievable, like, what do they call it? Not Walter Mitty-ish, but Rube Goldberg kind of a device in his backyard with like 15 different components. And he's had like millions of hits, and I think, well, that guy could probably now monetize it. He's kind of an engineer, I think, in his profession. So I'm thinking, if this guy keeps making these devices, they're so terrific to watch. And I think, well, he has innovated in a way and found a lot of eyeballs in something using his skills, his personality, but also his engineering skills to create content that I sat and watched. And it was like 20 minutes long. I mean, it was a long for like a YouTube video. So I'm thinking, people are going to be trying to create content, whether it be scripted or concert kind of things, and we'll see what works. You're like me. I think when we were talking, it's nothing like the live experience, and that we miss, and that we're going to have to give up for a while, I think. Um, but in the interim, it's going to be interesting to see how people fill this void, and I'm curious to see if any of those things stick. Maybe we're finally going to be able to stream theater in a way uh, for people that can't come to New York, or people that will never or have a difficult time seeing live theater. Will be able to have both in a way, in a business model that works artistically and protects the actors, and can be monetized in a way that everybody can benefit from it for their work. But it can broaden theater so that when you actually get a chance to see a live production, it's like watching what my dad was. I was talking to my 95-year-old father the other night about watching Lawrence of Arabia. He said, I just came across it. And I said, are you just starting watching it? And he goes, yeah. And I said, I hope you're comfortable. It's like a 3.5-hour film. He'd forgotten how long it was. But I remember one time years ago in Hollywood, they had it on the big screen, and I had never seen it when it first came out. Obviously, I'd only seen it on televisions, and that's when we had smaller screens. I've since seen it on a bigger screen TV, but to see it in like that widescreen Cinerama, Cinevision or something, whatever they shot, David Lean shot it with multiple cameras. They don't do that much anymore. Was extraordinary. And I thought, well, I experienced in a completely different way in a theater than I had on TV. And possibly maybe we can do that with theater and plays, and, innovate some way that we can introduce people to the theater that then will come and want to buy a live ticket.
Do you get concerned? One, as I've done these interviews, one subject that has been brought up to me is a lot of these live streams are either free. I know Andrew Lloyd Webber, who you may be familiar with.
I am. Yeah. It's a couple pictures of him around here.
He was really producing a lot of content at the beginning of this and making a lot of his shows available to stream. And those streams are either free or they cost a very low amount, $10 or $12 or something. Do you think that because now we've gotten used to the theater being streamed in our homes free, we're able to see all these fabulous productions at very little cost, are people going to return and pay for a ticket when we go back to a post-COVID world? Is that a concern?
Pay for a live theater ticket? Theater. I think they will. I think they've debated that for years with Broadway HD and some of these theater productions that are filmed. But I know from my own experience, I did a show called Contact at Lincoln Center, which was a dance show. And the final show that we did was filmed for Live from Lincoln Center, which they do it first class. It's we had 13 cameras. We had cameras on rails. We had done rehearsals all during the week so that the camera people, they had them flying on. It was almost like the NFL. It was unbelievable. There were cameras everywhere. And then when I saw it, as good as it was, and Susan Stroman was in the truck, with the director, saying about where she still had to make the decision the where the camera was focused, what angle. And as a theater goer, you sit in the theater and you have the wide, you can look at the little guy. I used to love, one time I went and saw, um, a Shakespeare production, and then I went to see Tosca at the Met one time, Franco Zeffirelli's Tosca years ago, and I was fascinated on this huge stage at the Metropolitan Opera by the little guy that walked in and lit the candles. This massive candelabras. Zeffirelli did these huge shows, and I realized that that's probably not where most of the audience was looking, because it was like Placido Domingo and all these, like, these famous people. And yet the care that this actor, moving slow, as an old man bent over and light, he was so incredibly, his craft was so amazing, just lighting the candelabra, that I couldn't take my eyes off him. And I said, you would never have that experience, because some director in a streamed show will decide where he wants you to look to follow the story that he wants you to follow. And a lot of times that takes your discretion as an audience member away. Somebody can go and spot the, third chorus person from the left and be fascinated by that performance, and or what they're doing, or they're dancing or something. So I think that will never go away. And that's been one of the reasons that I think filming theater has always been a challenge. I mean, we see it when these musicals are done for television. They're their own thing, but they are no replacement. Don't get me started on some of those, but yeah, they're definitely no replacement. Hairspray Live and all those. I think they're a long way from the experience that an audience would get, but it's better than nothing. And it's certainly worth paying for if you're never going to be able to get to New York to see that particular piece before it closes, or you're not near a big city that you're going to get a touring production of it. It may be worth seeing something that is iconic, especially when it comes to plays, because plays don't tour that often. Yeah. They're smaller, they're easier just to set the camera and let it focus on a smaller box set. And I mean, will we be able to see indecent touring, or would there's some of the great Mammoth plays that have played Broadway. Chances are they're not going to be playing in a 3,000 seat touring house.
And it's a very different feeling. I when I see a play, I like an intimate house of a play. And last time I was in New York, I saw To Kill a Mockingbird, and everybody's touting how wonderful that show is. But I was sitting in one of the balcony, I couldn't get a very good ticket. It was a hot show at the time. It was Jeff Daniels' last performance.
Right.
So sitting in the nosebleed seats. And I remember watching it just thinking, this is too big a venue for this. I want a smaller, intimate space. So
yeah,
I think a lot of these plays need kind of these intimate. They're not going to play as To Kill a Mockingbird. I don't know how that show is going to play at DPAC when it comes on tour. It's a intimate show that's going to be in this giant space.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's very, very true. And I remember Trevor Nunn, in the early days of Sunset Boulevard, he never liked a continental seating, the seating with no aisles.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those theaters built in the 70s had the on the side, and then you went across this long row before, and they reconfigured the Shubert Theater in LA, which is now gone, sadly, for the show, because Trevor Nunn always thought that the aisles were the audience's path, their road to the stage, their sense of kind of thrust. It's like an artery, a blood vessel, you know, to never be very far from an aisle. It's like, you know, and it was just a mental thing rather than being in a row, you know, where you just have so many people in front of you and no way to get out. And the stage is this very remote thing. It's like the Muni Theater in St. Louis, which I played, which holds like 12,000 people. You know, it's the largest theatrical venue, I think, in the country. And funny story, I remember when we were on stage with like Ken Page and a bunch of some wonderful actors. And I remember the director who was way out with a mic. And he said, darlings, when you speak, can you make some large gestures so that we know who's talking? And I'll never forget that. I felt like I was in like SpongeBob SquarePants or something, and for kids at theatrical, because you'd say, gee, what? And just like almost like a fencing movement, because for the people in the seats that were way in the back, you know, it's a bowl, it's an outside arena. And you can imagine. And one day I went back there and I looked at the stage and I went, I cannot believe people actually sit back here to see a theatrical production because the actors look like ants. So we had to move around a lot before we spoke, like jump up and down a little bit so people knew where to look.
When a show like Contact is being filmed for, you know, PBS or for great performances live from Lincoln Center, um, how does that change the show? What you guys are doing is I'm imagining there's some blocking or there's some beats that may have to be changed. Is that true?
Yeah, no, and no blocking changed. Sometimes performances, we were encouraged for certain moments that were more intimate moments to realize that those moments will be played in a more restrictive kind of way, which is hard. I'd been doing a show for the better part of, I guess, 2 years at that point. And so the performance was just in my muscles. And yet I knew there were moments when I didn't want to be too big to be playing for the last row in the Vivian Beaumont Theater. Not that it's a very big theater, because it's not, but you know, there's a certain size to a theatrical performance, and it was a dance show, so it was a very physical show. But then after we just kept that in our head, I remember Susan Stroman said before we did it, because it was live. So, I mean, there was no chance if you screw up or you fall down or you forget your lines, you know, America, everybody watching PBS that night was going to see you screw up. And it was the final show. And, you know, I wouldn't have wanted to go to the after party having screwed up their 2000 Tony winning show. So I think Susan Stroman just said, okay, you've had these things in your head as we've been rehearsing, because we were doing the show at night, but rehearsing a little bit during the day. And she said, now just completely forget it, because the last thing I want you to be thinking about when you're doing this final show is, am I too big? Am I small? So just, you know, for the week before we did it, when we do the show at the Beaumont, do our regular 8 a week, you know, we just kind of kept it in our mind when there were no cameras on. Okay, this may be a moment that might want to make a little smaller or a little more intimate, or lower my voice a little bit, or, you know, make it a bit more of a filmatic moment as opposed to a larger theatrical moment. But yeah, blocking wise, no, because the show is so choreographed within an inch of its life. We'd have killed ourselves, I think, if we'd have made any changes. Yeah.
When you're part of a filming like that, um, are you more prepared for that experience filming at the theater because of your television work and Three's Company sitcom and Jake and the Fat Man? I mean, you're used to having cameras there.
Yeah, you're not intimidated by the equipment. I think if you've never worked, sometimes you can allow yourself to get slightly self-conscious. Although I must say, for all the people in Contact, again, they've been doing the show in some cases for 2 years since it opened. and I think once you get into it, if you're smart, the cameras disappear, even though there may be one literally feet from you, staring up at you, or that thing that went around. There's a foot camera to get the feet, the intricate dancing feet. And it was like right on the edge of the stage, and it was a remote control camera, and it'd go, kind of make a little whirling sound as it like tracked back and forth. So it was, you know, fairly distracting if you let it. But when the lights go out and you put your game face on, that's the job. So I think all that kind of disappeared for the most part for most of us.
In the last few weeks, particularly in big cities, in Chicago, in New York, on Broadway, we've seen an uprising within the entertainment industry, and a lot of Black and Brown actors coming forward and speaking very openly and candidly about um, racism within the theater industry. As you've been on sets and in shows, have you witnessed racism on stage with the performers that you've been performing with? I mean, not the people, not like your colleagues. I'm not asking you to call
Yeah.
people out, but
Oh, yeah.
have you seen this?
I think here's what I will say. I can only take responsibility for myself. And I realize as I've talked to my daughter, I've read a number of things that people have written, artists of color have written, that I've worked with and that I've admired. And I've read these heartfelt experiences that they've had. And granted, one of the things that I love about our community of the theater is it's one of the least judgmental, most diverse, most loving, accepting, I think, industries in the world. And yet, when I read some of these pieces that they wrote, I think I will have to challenge myself now in a different way, because I don't think I was aware that some of the challenges that some of these artists face were there. I kind of had led myself to believe that because our industry and these people were so loved and their talent was so celebrated within our cast, and again, that what they experienced many times earlier in their careers before they got to a Broadway show or an off-Broadway show, I was kind of astounded by that. And I realized that a lot of that is my own lens,
Yeah.
if you will. And so what I have to do, the only thing I can control is the way in which now I will try to engage with the artists that I work with of color, and both as writers and actors and producers and directors, and try to challenge myself to kind of be more sensitive to some of their the trajectory of their careers and some of their challenges. Because as you see, I mean, my experience, I'm never going to have the experience of a person of color in a show, but I can at least challenge myself and my daughter to celebrate some of the differences and some of the things that artists of color bring, and also I think really promote and listen to their stories. I'm hoping that my industry now, I love the fact that I think I went on, I'm going to plug Jeff Bezos, but I think it was Amazon Prime, and they had put a number of the movies about race. We watched Just Mercy a while ago, and Selma, and then some of the lesser known movies that they just listed them all, and they made them free. And I said, well, this is an opportunity for writers and actors to really educate people like me and the wider world about their experiences. And even though there have been, from Raisin in the Sun to so many wonderful, wonderful pieces way back about the African American experience in this country, I think this is a time now to promote those, to get out there and experience anew and try to understand and walk in those shoes a little bit for all of us, and hopefully be more sensitive to what that experience is all about. I can't make anybody else do it, but if I can be responsible for myself in any way I can, and promote that work and consume that work, as an actor, go and watch a play about that experience. I remember the Negro Ensemble Company, August Wilson. Do you remember that theater? I used to walk by that theater. That was the name of the Negro Ensemble Company. And they were famous for doing the plays of August Wilson. And I don't know that I have ever seen, I think ever seen an August Wilson play. And I'm thinking, well, this is one of the great African-American playwrights about that experience. And I'm thinking, it's like saying I've never seen Shakespeare, or I've never seen, that's like a whole canon of experience that I'm not familiar with. So I'm going to have to, read up on August Wilson and read up on some of these experiences, and hopefully, open my eyes a little bit more. I'm an old dog, but if this feels like a moment, for me. I remember 69, 70. I was a kid, but this feels similar. The Vietnam War, it feels like that was kind of a tipping point. And I'm hoping, as a nation, but also as artists, that this can be a bit of a tipping point for us, that we can finally have the conversation that I think we really need to have, that we haven't really had yet.
I agree. I agree. I hope this is a moment, and I hope there's some permanence to this moment, that it's not just fleeting and we go back to business as usual on the other side of this. I hope there's some sort of.
Yeah. I'm always amazed at how quickly we move on to the next. We have that iPhone mentality, the next thing, the next shiny object, and certainly lately. But I don't know. I can't help but think, because of how quickly this has shifted, and the percentages, if you're even interested in that, in the amount of corporations. I mean, NASCAR, the NFL, you look at some of the statements and you think, well, okay, the businesses are protecting themselves, they're making, but then when you say, no, this feels different. I mean, I've gotten emails from businesses and hotels and Hilton and all these places that have my email, and I've gotten what feels like hundreds of emails talking about, okay, we're going to take responsibility and this is what we're going to do. And that feels different for me.
It does. It does. I hope. I hope.
I hope.
Um, One person that has surprised me during this pandemic, and this is early in the pandemic, is Andrew Lloyd Webber, with the amount of content he was producing, the amount of time he was spending making videos. It felt very innovative and genuine to me. Some of the things he did with playing the tracks and inviting people to sing. What was your experience with him, and does any of this surprise you?
No, I think, well, first of all, he is really a theatrical entrepreneur. He owns theaters. He creates content. He is continually, represented on Broadway. I think, one year, a few years ago, he had 3 or 4 on at the same time. I mean, it was only, I think, Cats and School of Rock and Phantom, and there's something else that he had, I can't remember. But so he is in a position,
Mhm.
to um, fund these kinds of things, and I've been surprised that he personally has shown up to do it in some cases, because he's an interesting guy. He's a shy man. He's a very, very shy man, and I I I remember working with him on Sunset. He'd call us over to the piano when he was doing, and I mean, this sounds like ooh, but it was just a normal thing. They were rewriting the show, so he'd call us out of rehearsal, sometimes Judy Kuhn and I, and he was working on this kind of Joe and Betty, da dun da da dee dun dun, which was all new. So he'd sit at the piano and he'd play it before it had been written down, and David Caddick, his music director, was there before it had been transcribed. And he had a piece of paper, and it was literally, and I remember kind of pinching myself because uh, after it was over, but at the time I was like, yes. And he'd say, sing this for me, and he'd plunk it out and he'd sing it, and he'd change it around a little bit, and then he'd make some notations and everything. And I can remember that he was very much involved, in the creation of it. And you think a guy like that, that's worth $3 billion now and owns theaters, and has one of the world's largest wine collections. There's all these things that you read about Andrew Lloyd Webber. I'm not surprised, because I think it's still all about that creative time with artists and with people creating something. And that's why he's continued to do it. I mean, he could have put his feet up a long time ago. And it's not, oh, the woman in white I saw, they're not always successful completely. And so I'm really not surprised that he stepped up in a way that he said, wow, my art form, the thing that I've dedicated my life to, is under threat. So with my following and my money and the interest that I have and the people that I can call around me, I'm going to do something to feed, and it's actually not bad business either. But I think that's probably not why he's doing it. Or why would he release all this stuff free? I think he's just trying to create something that will give people that are interested in theater an outlet, you know. And it's not bad watching the man that created all these very famous shows sit there and just be at times incredibly awkward, which he can be, and he's just kind of this impish kind of guy, genius, of course, but and just interact with people. I think it's very brave. I actually think it's pretty brave of the guy.
I do too, and I was very there was an accessibility there. I think all of a sudden he became an accessible human
Yeah,
person. We all know who he is. We've
right.
seen these shows, but he is truly the man behind the mask quite often.
Yeah.
To
And
see
it's just,
them.
you just made me think of something. We were talking about the Sondheim thing that was streamed earlier. You said maybe this period of time is the opportunity to get to know people on more of an intimate way, like the way we're talking here. And in the Sondheim thing, we saw a couple of hours of theater artists sitting at their dining room table, drinking a glass of wine, and almost singing Sondheim on pitch, in an intimate way that was a different experience than sitting in a theater and watching someone on stage. Maybe that's the opportunity to kind of rediscover some personalities that you like and some material that you like in a different way, in a more intimate way. Like you said, you love intimate theater, where there's not much more intimate than sitting at your dining room table and talking like we are, in your this memorial to tchotchkes that I've collected over a million years, surrounded by. I always wanted something like this when I lived in New York, but none of us had any room, so I had all these posters that were like, shoved into closets and boxes and stuff like that. So when I moved to Raleigh and I finally had a room that I could dedicate to just, putting some putting some of these show posters on the wall. I went nuts.
You've had so many great roles on stage, in film, on television. Do you have a favorite?
Oh gosh, yeah, they're like your children. Although I only have one, so I definitely have a favorite child. Um, I think they were all challenging in different ways. They come at times in your life that are. I've been lucky enough in with the television work, and then Sunset when I'd always wanted to be in a big Broadway show, and I'd never really tested myself, and I had been in New York at first, but then gone to LA and spent the better part of 10 years in television. And I always wanted to do a Broadway musical. And when I got the opportunity, that was the one. And it was huge. And it was such a challenge, the singing and the amount of stage time and the kind of operatic quality that particular production had. Big, big, big. And I think that came at the perfect time, and it just got me interested in theater all over again. So I've been so fortunate. I did Mamma Mia. It's a fun, light show, but I did it at a time in my life just not that many years ago. It was the first time my daughter could see me in a show, because most of what I did, she was too young to see, or it wasn't appropriate. And so to be able to go out, and then that mega mix at the end of it, it's almost like you feel like you're a rolling stone. Most shows, even big shows, you come out, you take a bow and people clap, or if they love it, they stand and everything. But the Mamma Mia, the mega mix, people are up there, they're shooting off lasers, and people have and it felt literally like I was like a Beatle or something. You're in spandex, it's ridiculous, but so fun. And for like I was on the other end of middle age at that time, and I went like, I feel so lucky right now, that I can just go around in high heels and spandex and have my daughter see her dad take a bow in a Broadway show with like embedded jewels all over. It was just wild, but it was just so joyful. So that came across, at a wonderful time. And of course, Contact, the challenge of the dance world. I never really knew that much. I'd always been a fan, but I got to see it from the inside. And now I've worked with Carolina Ballet a few times, and now my daughter is obsessed with dance.
Mm.
She dances constantly and is in a number of performance dance groups. And and it gave me an appreciation for dance from the inside out that has stayed with me. It'll stay with me for my entire life. So, all my theatrical experiences have been special in different ways. And then some of the straight plays, Mammoth's Race, I remember we did it down here, and it 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 had a dialogue almost with the audience. And that was one thing that now, in looking back on, I realized, because Mammoth really kind of looked then at the moment that we're experiencing now. It's looking at a set of facts completely different way, whether you're a white or an African American, looking at the same thing and seeing two different things. And I think that play made me realize that at the time. And I said, this is extraordinary writing done by David Mamet. So that was a great experience, saying, wow. So sometimes the straight plays, those intimate straight plays, that you really get a feel for the audience, whether they're with you, do they like you, do they dislike you? You really can feel the pulse of the audience. I'm like you, I love small, intimate theater,
Mm.
as a performer. Sadly, the business model is difficult. So, small, little intimate theater for an actor does not always pay the mortgage, but when you get the opportunity to do it, it's a real joy and a real privilege to be able to do it in a small space.
I will say there's very few stage moments that truly take my breath away. Um, the house, we spoke about this when I was at your house. Um, the house in Sunset Boulevard coming
Yeah.
down from the ceiling. That was one of those moments where I just was dead. I had never
Yeah.
seen anything like that on stage, and it was awesome in every possible way. And that's
Yeah.
something you couldn't get if you saw it on television. If you saw a video of that, you might say, oh, wow, that's a really cool effect. But sitting in there in that theater and seeing that
Yeah,
happen.
because it came down. It was first of all, it was 2 stories high, and it was up in the fly floor, and so it came down this 2-story mansion interior, and then glided forward, and landed, silently in place. And I remember the first time I saw it because they had to build um, a steel uh, stage within the stage in order to hold it, because it weighed 45,000 pounds, and they had to do the counterweight, and the normal, stage, the bricks and mortar of the stage stuff, it could not hold it. It was too heavy. So they literally had to use these huge I-beams in order to suspend it. So technically it was an unbelievable tour de force. And I think, like you, the first time I was able to see the show, um, I had been doing it for a long time, and I had some time off, and I went to see um, Lauren Kennedy. We were dating at the time, and went to see her do Betty Schaefer in Denver, I think it was. And I'd never seen the show from the front, because my stage manager said, if you're too sick to be in the show, you're home in bed. It was a different time. Nobody got swung out. If you were a lead, you did not get to watch the show. So I had literally never seen it from the audience's perspective. And I remember the first time sitting in the audience watching it, and when they did it on the road, they took the full grid with it. This was the first national tour. I mean, what, talk about a like 15 trucks or something. And the first time I saw that house from the front, I was like, that's what's been going on in back of me. I was like, whoa, I thought they were looking at me. Yeah, not so much. I had really, I mean, I knew because I'd watch it and some of the blocking, but there were moments when that house had a life of its own, the lighting and everything else, when I was singing or looking out at the audience. So I didn't really know that it was another enormous, enormous character in that
Yeah, I was
piece.
just saying the house was a character in that show.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll try to find for those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, I will try
Yeah.
to find some sort of um, picture or photograph of this set, because it is truly one of the extraordinary sets. I don't know, did they win set design that year?
Yes, John Napier, who did Cats and who did Les Mis. So he had been around for a while. He won the Tony. Yeah,
Yeah. And you were nominated for a Tony. So what was that
right.
moment like? What was that like being there? Because I missed the Tonys this year. I look forward to that
Yeah,
every year in my house.
yeah. I don't know what they're going to do. What do you think they're going to do? Combine years, or
I
I
don't
don't
know.
know. I
I
feel
don't know.
bad for. Anyway, it's. I guess people are kind of making it up as they go along, and we'll see. But yeah, it was thrilling. I mean, it's always nice to be recognized for your hard work, and because I was kind of a newbie, I'd been around for a long time, but because that was my first Broadway show, I, maybe they're not gonna, you know, give it to the new guy. Maybe I need to pay my dues more. Maybe, but I knew these kinds of roles didn't come along very often. So I remember one of the stage managers who was also, I think he was involved in serving coffee. I don't want to get him in trouble, but he was involved with the Tony committee when when they finalized the nominations.
Mhm.
And before they officially came out, I got a fax. And I think it was about 1 or 2 in the morning, and they were going to be announced the next morning or something like that. And he just faxed me, and I said, and I went like, because I heard the fax go off, and I couldn't sleep. I knew it was gonna. I was having a hard time sleeping that night, as you might imagine, because I was playing. Well, what if it doesn't happen? Will you be disappointed? No. Can you be? What'll go? Going through my mind as I was trying to get some rest. And when I heard that fax go off, that's an old term. Uh, uh, I looked at it, and I said, ah. So then I smiled and went back to sleep.
Until
Yeah.
you're woken up by the phone calls being
Yeah,
announced.
exactly. Yeah, my friends. Yeah.
Do you have a dream role?
You know what? I always kind of wanted to do um, the King in Camelot. I always, for some reason, I always thought I had that guy in me. And it's a very long musical, and it's not the most successful musical. But I remember I listened to the record when we had the record in my house, and then I saw the Richard Harris, Vanessa Redgrave movie of it, and I just always thought the role of the king, there was a vulnerability, there was there were qualities that I always said I that would be fun to get a shot at that guy sometime. But nobody does it much anymore. So,
Mm.
and I remember I got offered on a limited tour of it. It was a while back, and it was a very small tour. It'd been years ago, and I think my daughter was tiny, tiny, very little, and it just didn't work out. It wasn't, the timing wasn't good, and I didn't want to be away from home for months with a young baby.
Oh,
So I didn't do it. I think back and I went, oh, too bad, because I'll probably never get a shot. But I do think about it. I do think about that role sometimes, but there's so many. I probably, if I sat here for a little while, I'd think of others. A lot of straight play roles. To Kill a Mockingbird, that's a role that I adore. Atticus Finch, I adore that role. I'd love to do that role. Yeah.
I'd love to see you in that role. I'm going to say something. Don't come at me, people on Facebook. Um, I didn't love Jeff Daniels in that role. I love Celia's. Oh my gosh,
Oh
hers
yeah.
was
Oh,
unbelievable.
she's so
And I
she's
don't
so
know,
talented.
maybe it was just his last show and he was just done
Yeah.
or burnt out, or I don't know what, but
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
a good performance.
I
And I'm a fan of his.
Yeah, yeah. No, I also I remember, the character in Fun Home. I get, occasionally you get calls to go in for stuff for me, tours and other things. Um, and usually, when you've been around long enough, a lot of people out there kind of keep you in mind for stuff
Mhm.
that you're probably pretty right for. I mean, somebody else had that idea because I thought of To Kill a Mockingbird, and there was some talk maybe for an understudy, which I don't want to do. But sometimes when I think of roles, wow, I'd love to do that, or I'd love to assume that role when the original person or something, if I didn't get in on it to begin with. And occasionally the phone will ring and somebody will say, yeah, they're thinking about replacing, or they're doing the tour. Are you interested in maybe coming in and auditioning for it or something like that? So, hopefully some of these things will happen. Probably not To Kill a Mockingbird, obviously, because that's a established star and track. I think Ed Harris went in, right? I
He did. And I would
think.
have loved to see him in that role.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah, he was an acting class of mine in LA for a while, Ed Harris. Yeah. But yeah, that's a good role. And that version too, because I like Aaron Sorkin a lot, although I haven't seen it. Yeah.
So what's on your pandemic playlist? What have
What's on my pandemic? Well, with a 16-year-old, I am constantly, every now and then she'll say, Daddy, what have you been listening to? What's your favorite song? What have you been listening to? And I'm always coming up blank because I listen to whatever she happens to be playing. We re-engaged with Hamilton not long ago, because we just wanted to kind of, relive that again, and listen to that. But gosh, I listen to a lot of jazz these days, just because I find that if if I listen to musical theater, I listen to it. I have to actively listen. It's not something I can have in the background. So when I'm going around and reading, I sometimes put on some Miles Davis or something like that. And my daughter and I were talking about how she said, is it true that Mozart makes you smarter? And I went, I don't know. There was that movement years ago, right? For babies, they listen to Mozart. They're supposed to like make their brains develop. And I said, well, my Mozart sometimes is jazz. classic jazz. I like to listen to, have it on in the background. So that's what I've been listening to lately. But not much, not much musical theater. No, no. I should though. I listen to Jagged Little Pill, and I love Jason Mraz, and the new James Taylor standards is he's kind of my comfort,
Mm,
kind of my musical comfort food,
yeah,
JT.
yeah.
I Massachusetts last summer. I was up there doing a musical, and I went to his Fourth of July a concert at. Now I'm going to say, what is the big musical venue out in the Berkshires? Ah, very famous. Anyway, he performs there every Fourth of July, or tries to, and so I got tickets, and I got to hear James Taylor on the lawn. And yeah, he's kind of my go-to in times like these, when it's like unsure, when you're not sure what next week or next month is going to hold, I guess.
Are you making TikToks with Briley? Do we need to look you up on TikTok?
Oh no, she keeps showing me. She said, "Look at this daddy daughter. They're dancing. They're doing all this stuff." And I went, I don't know. I would put. I think I would put too much pressure on myself to. But she does it when I'm driving. Sometimes she'll just tilt the camera for her friends and everything. We did one this morning about how bad the hand sanitizer smells. She hated it, and we got back in the car after going to the store, and we always do our hands and everything. She goes, "It smells so bad," and I didn't realize she was filming a TikTok, and we were discussing how awful and over. We had to put the windows down. It was like, you couldn't breathe from the hand sanitizer. But so yeah, but we're not too coordinated. Although she does share a lot of them, the good ones, with me, the ones that she really likes. Yeah, it's an art form that is uniquely teen centric, isn't it?
Yes. What is on your watch list? What are you binge? Are you binge watching anything? Did you watch Tiger King?
Yeah, I'm ashamed to say. Um,
Hold it against you.
I was going to say, is anyone admitting they watch Tiger King? In the future, it's like, oh, yeah, that's kind of like a car wreck. I mean, once you started it, because it started in Florida, like in Homestead, Florida, where I was
Where
born.
are you
I
from?
mean,
Yeah.
I was, and I went like, oh no, is this going to be a complete and total, like, am I going to have to apologize for being from Homestead for the rest of my life because of this thing? But they didn't stay there very long. But I told you I've been watching some of the movies, Just Mercy and Selma, trying to get a better sense of that. We've been watching the Fab Five, uh, on the new season. We love Hayao Miyazaki. Do you know Hayao Miyazaki? He's the famous Japanese animator.
Anime?
Probably he's got a bit of a genius. Did Spirited Away and Totoro. We have shared a love for those movies. We've collected almost all of them, and I bought two. There was a list of the 15 best Hayao Miyazaki movies, and two of them we hadn't seen, so I ordered them on Amazon. So we've been watching some of those. It's random though. What are you watching? Isn't it random? I
It's
mean,
very random. It's very. I don't. I mean, it's kind of crazy. I don't watch a whole lot of television, but we binged Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, and I
oh,
really enjoyed that show. I didn't think I would. I wasn't a big Glee fan, and don't typically get into those kinds of shows, but this one was really good. I'm glad they've been renewed.
I have to ask Riley about that. I don't think we've watched it. I wouldn't be surprised if she hasn't, but I might ask her about that. That would be.
Bernadette Peters made a cameo on that. Alex
Oh
Newell,
wow.
extraordinary singer. I
Wow.
saw it once on this island is a regular, but it's a funny show. It's a very poignant show. It's smart. I really like it.
Yeah.
So I
We'll have
recommend
to
it. I watched it with my daughter. We enjoyed it. So
we'll have to give it a look. We have things that we do when we really want to dedicate a movie and sit down and watch a movie. And some nights it's like, let's watch the Great British Baking Show or something. We love that. Just something just to kind of fill the time but enjoy something that we can enjoy together. Some days you feel like really buying into something,
Mhm.
and some days you just feel like something escapist, you
Well, I
know.
feel like we all have to take a breath. We have to give ourselves permission to take a breath and enjoy some light entertainment because everything is so heavy right now, so serious.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's true. And I mean, people were watching Contagion, and I said, that's the last thing I want to watch right now. I mean, when we get clear of this 6 months or a year or something like that, then I'll go back and I'll watch Contagion. But that was like the most rented movie in April or something. And I was thinking, man, people are like gluttons for punishment. I can't.
I was asking people in interviews, what kind of stories are we going to see on the other side of this pandemic? And I would joke with people, are we going to see Contagion, the musical? What do you think? Are we going to see a lot of?
I think I don't know if we're going to see Contagion the musical. I do think we're going to see stories about this pandemic and how people psychologically and emotionally have dealt with it in different ways in families and relationships. Hopefully, more stories written um, about the African American experience. I think from these last weeks that are going to be important. But I do think this is going to cause people to kind of look at the psychological toll and how this has changed us. I mean, I know people that are afraid in a way that to go outside and experience the world because they have maybe a little bit of phobia way back somewhere that this has really brought it out. And now their ability to re-engage, I think, is going to be, we've kind of been hermits in our own way. Um, wow, we could do an alliteration with your name, couldn't we? I didn't think. um, but I think, getting back out and rediscovering, broader relationships and maybe there's going to be some stories about the outdoors and nature because I think people have embraced that and rediscovered that in a way. And hopefully, those stories will be told with this time because, 2020, I read, what was it? Uh, Written by Stephen King, directed by Quentin Tarantino, 2020. It kind
Yeah.
of feels that way right now. So I think I keep telling my daughter, look, your sweet 16th birthday, you had a drive by, but you'll always remember it.
Yeah. Well,
You
my
know?
daughter had this weird graduation. I mean, all the
Yeah.
graduation, the proms, those rites of passage were
Yeah.
very skewed, but she'll never forget it. She'll never.
Yeah. And in a way, this kind of, you don't want to say disappointment is a character builder, but my dad's 95 years old. He did 52 bombing missions in World War II, got through the Depression where his father lost everything. And so I look at somebody like my dad and he seems, he can't go outside. We can't see him. He's in an assisted care facility, which is its own frightening concept for us. And yet I talk to him every day. He's, pretty buoyant about his experience in the TV that he watches. And, his life has gotten very small and we can't literally go in to see him. He can't have any contact. They feed him in his room. No, there's no, and yet I realize that, he's got this character built of that greatest generation. And I talked to my daughter about it and I said, well, your granddad has gone through all these moments. And I said, this is one of those challenges that you will look back on. And yes, you've lost your spring dance program. And yes, you've lost, going to New York to see theater with your Broughton dance group. And, your birthday party, a trip with her mom. I mean, the kids have lost a lot this spring. And yet, hopefully, they'll look back and they've made it through and they're making choices. And, we'll see. And we've certainly spent a lot more time together, made a few puzzles and played Monopoly a couple of times because it lasts forever. And then, so anyway, hopefully it'll be an experience that'll build character in some of these kids that have been through it. And life is not always, you know, that it's not always easy,
Like
and you
you
just
said,
have to make it up.
so many of us were going 100 miles an hour and now we're going 5, and maybe it's okay. Maybe it's okay to take time to figure out
Yeah.
what matters, the relationships that are important. I think that's what
And
this.
also checking on people. People have been checking on people that it's not like, hey, let's go out and get a drink, or hey, what can you do? What have you done for me lately? But it's literally like, hey, how you doing? I know you're living alone, or you doing all right, or and those kinds of habits that we're building, maybe I think some of this is going to continue,
I
people
hope.
working at home, successfully working at home. I think maybe people don't need to go into the office with certain types of jobs as much. There's going to be a lot of innovation that happens out of this. There's going to be a lot of businesses, I think, that are negatively affected too. That's a sad thing. I mean, we've been talking about our own. I mean, it's been devastated, and yet I think it'll come roaring back. I think there'll be a pent up demand. That's what I have to believe, but it's going to be a while.
It will be, and I will say it's very impressive. Andrew Lloyd Webber, I was sent some videos of different things his company is looking at for what reopening our theaters will look like. Particularly at the time, looking at the model of Phantom of the Opera, which was playing in South Korea, and he's always on the cutting edge. There's people on the
Yeah.
cutting edge trying to figure this out. So,
Well, what I hope, I don't want it to become an even more elite experience. Sometimes that's what I worry about. I think, that if people can stream a Broadway show at home for 10 or $15, and if they can only put a third of the seats, then they'll charge $750 a seat for those seats, have the rights to stream it much cheaper, and live theater becomes even more unobtainable for average people. And that is a concern that I have, before guys like Andrew figure this out, on how, because the business model doesn't work
yes.
with 50% of a house. It doesn't work in some restaurants with 50%. And I guarantee you, a Broadway show that's doing under 60 or 70% business on Broadway closes.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a Broadway show out there that was, before this happened, that was doing 50% business and could stay open. They just can't afford to stay open.
Well, look
So
at even a show like Frozen. Frozen's not coming back. I mean, that's shocking. I mean, to a lot of people,
yeah,
I think it was shocking.
yeah. And it was the one that was doing the least well of all the Disney shows. And I think they thought, that one we're gonna cut the one that is lagging behind these other two shows. And by lagging, I say it was still doing great business,
Still doing well.
but they're tying up theaters, and I can't even imagine for the producers, and the actors losing their health insurance. I mean, it's a real challenge.
Well, I hope to see you back on stage. I
I
didn't
don't
make
want to
it.
end on such a sour note.
We're going to end up on a good note.
Oh,
I
good.
cannot wait to see you on stage. I will
Thanks.
reshare. I created an Alan Campbell Spotify playlist when I had you on the podcast, and
Oh my
I will
gosh.
reshare that with folks.
Wow.
And hopefully, we can all be together safely in the live theatrical space, because there's nothing like it. I just
It's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's just going to take a little longer than we had hoped, but it'll happen again. People are not going to deny themselves the opportunity to see live theater. And maybe when it does happen, there'll be stories that are important stories to tell out of this, in about race and about public health and about things. The theater teaches. That's how it started. The Greeks. I mean, it has always been a, a, a place of social discussion and challenge. And I think it'll be that way when it's at its best. It will be that again. And I hope those stories are what people are working now.
And I feel like you could write a book. Have you written a book? You need to write a book. You've worked with incredible people. John
Well,
Ritter.
I have a lot of stories. I have a lot of stories. Well, I need to be I need to be put with a writer that's going to like crack the whip. Someone that'll help me write with me, that'll crack the whip and keep me focused.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with us tonight. I know a few of you tuned in late. This will live on Facebook. You can watch it from the beginning. Um, and I did a really beautiful podcast with you, which is why I didn't ask you about things like Three's a Crowd and Jake and the Fat Man. We covered all that ground in the last interview. So go ahead, go back and listen to that podcast. It was lovely. And just stay safe and healthy. So
Thank you. You too, Lauren. And thank you for doing this. Thank you for keeping people connected to the arts here in Raleigh and in the wider area. And hopefully people can stay connected, and so that when theaters open again, all this pent up demand and just give people a little bit of what they're hungry for from some of these streaming stuff. Not that they're necessarily hungry for you and I sitting in our offices talking, but hey, it's an opportunity to stay connected to the art that we love.
yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for tuning in on Facebook. And I will see everyone tomorrow. I will be on at 7:30, I think, tomorrow night. I don't remember unless I have my calendar in front of me, but I think tomorrow night I'll be with Aurelia Belfield at 7:30. So come right back here then. Thank you, Alan. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thanks. Good night.